So let's talk a little bit more in depth now about the first practice of being great at developing others through coaching, and that's establishing rapport and being authentic. Let me share a story with you. My son, who just about a year ago got his driver's license, while he was learning how to drive, one day I was sitting in the passenger seat, he was driving, and my daughter, who's a couple of years younger, was sitting in the seat behind us. And as he was driving along, his sister in the back seat was cracking jokes because as the Jeep was going through the lanes, we were kind of weaving from side to side, and she was just kind of making light of the fact that, hey, you can't keep the Jeep in the middle of the road. Well, I drive kind of an old beat-up Jeep. I love my Jeep. And so Brenton, his response was, well, it's the car. I can't keep the steering wheel straight. But then a few minutes later, when we switched and I was driving, Brianna was real quick to point out again that, hey, when Dad drives the Jeep, it stays right down the middle of the lane. And all of a sudden, Brenton recognized, you know what? It's not the Jeep, it's the driver of the Jeep. And so that really brings to the surface an important aspect of developing others. Oftentimes, when other people around us don't respond to our desire for them to grow and develop, it's easy to point the finger at them. But sometimes it's us. Sometimes we're not setting a tone in the relationship that really does make room for trust and rapport to develop. And without those things, then it's really difficult to have a great development and a great coaching conversation or even ongoing relationship. So how do you build that environment of trust and rapport with someone so that when the opportunity to have a coaching conversation comes up, it actually goes well? So let's talk about that a little bit. What I want to do is give you some characteristics that describe leaders that do a great job at developing that sort of rapport with others. And then I'm going to ask you some questions. And as we go through those questions, I want you just to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 would be the lowest, and 5 would be the highest. And just spend a few minutes reflecting on how you do at setting that tone and creating that environment of trust with people around you, okay? So first of all, great people developers develop a relationship. Great people developers develop a relationship. So here's some questions. Do you build trust with others? Give yourself a rating on a 1 to 5. What do you think other people say about you? Do you build trust? Do you build that sense of connection? And then secondly, do you encourage collaboration? Are you the kind of person that challenges people to work together and to collaborate with others and to really build a sense of teamwork? That's a great question to ask, and that plays into your ability to develop a relationship. Another question is, do you recognize the accomplishments of others? When someone really takes some steps forward and they achieve something, are you the kind of person that acknowledges that? Hey, way to go, that was a win. And maybe even in front of others, acknowledge that win. So that plays into your ability to develop a relationship. And then here's another question. Are you genuine and do you truly connect with others? So give yourself a rating there, again, on a 1 to 5 scale. What do you think? Do you really make that connection? What would other people around you say? Are you genuine? Are you authentic? That plays a big role in your ability to build rapport and build trust. So great people developers develop a relationship. Now, the second characteristic of great people developers is great people developers communicate effectively. Great people developers communicate effectively. So some questions and rate yourself. Do you listen effectively? Do you do more talking or do you do more listening? So just stop and think about that for a minute because that plays into your ability to communicate. Here's another question. Do you ask powerful and insightful questions? So do you know how to ask questions that cause people to really stop and think and lead people to that light bulb moment or lead people to thinking about what their next steps are going to be, drawing the best out of them? So rate yourself there. What about the next question? Do you value diverse ideas? Do you really appreciate different opinions and different perspectives? And are you open to hearing those different ideas and those different perspectives? Well, that ties to your ability to communicate. And then the fourth question there is, do you provide feedback in an empowering way? When others need to hear some perspective that you have to bring to bear, especially about them, do you do so in a way that really is encouraging and motivating to them? Or Do you think it's possible that they could feel a little discouraged or maybe demotivated after you give feedback? So just rate yourself there on a 1 to 5 scale. All of those are a part of your ability to communicate. Okay, so great people developers communicate effectively. The third characteristic is that great people developers inspire change. Great people developers inspire change. So here's some questions. Are you able to help others set goals and expectations? Are you able to help them think, what do you want to get out of this? What are your goals? What are those steps that you're going to take? Well, that's a part of inspiring change. And another question, do you help others become more willing to change? Are you the kind of person that others would say, the more time I spend with them, the more motivated I feel to take next steps and to be the person that God created me to be? So do you foster that willingness to change? And then another question is, do you foster innovation and new thinking? So as you're engaging with people that you're developing, would you say it's true that people are more inclined to think of new ideas? And do you challenge people to be willing to innovate and try new approaches? So rate yourself on that question. And then the last one is, do you hold others accountable to follow through? So do other people know that you're the kind of person, when they say they're going to take a step, that you're going to come back and check with them? You're the one that's going to say, hey, how did that go? And follow up and hold them accountable. So give yourself a rating on that. Great people developers inspire change. And then the last characteristic, great people developers provide connections. Great people developers provide connections. So a few more questions for you to think and reflect on. So rate yourself in these areas. First, do you look for ways to connect others with new opportunities? Hey, this is an opportunity for you that I think would be great for your growth and your development, and you make that connection. Do you do that? So rate yourself. Are you aware of training and books and resources that could help others? Do you know about tools and those resources that are really going to help other people grow in the areas that they're wanting to see themselves develop within? That's a great question. So rate yourself there. And then, do you have experience using helpful tools and assessments? The tools that have helped you become more self-aware in your own development are really helpful as you're helping others go through the same process. And so, are you intentional about thinking, what tools have helped me? What resources have helped me so that I can in turn enable other people to benefit from them as well? So rate yourself. Would you say that's a 1 or a 5 or somewhere in between? And then the last question is, do you connect people with new relationships? Recognizing that sometimes one of the best things you can do to help develop people is to introduce them to another relationship. Maybe it's another mentoring relationship or a person that can give them an opportunity that maybe they wouldn't have access to otherwise. So rate yourself there. Great people developers provide connections. So all of these characteristics of people developers really play a role in your ability to build an environment of trust. And the more intentional you are about cultivating that environment of trust in the relationships you have day after day after day, when the opportunity comes to lead someone to that light bulb moment and draw the best out from them, then it's more likely to occur. All right, so let's talk now about the second practice that will help you be great at a coaching approach, and that's to learn to recognize where a person is in the stages of change. So let me share a story with you. About 5 years ago, over the course of a year, I really got focused on getting into shape, and I lost a fair amount of weight, about 35 or 40 pounds over the course of a year. And so my story was similar to a lot of others. In college, I was in great shape and even played a little bit of college baseball, and then got out of school, and then 1 year at a time just found myself getting out of shape. And as time went on, I knew I got to do something about this. But for me, I just kept going back to, I don't have time. I'm busy. I have kids. I have a family now, and there's just so much going on. Until one day, I was actually in a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and I was reading, just kind of thumbing through some biographies. I love to read biographies. And I picked up a book about George W. Bush. And I was just skimming through some things about his last presidency. And I was just kind of looking over a chapter about the routine that he kept. And I came to a page that actually walked through his daily routine. And I noticed right there on the page that in the middle of the day, a typical day for him as president was at 1 o'clock to take a break for an hour and go work out. And all of a sudden, in that moment, sitting right there in the bookstore, it dawned on me, if the president of the United States has time to work out, who in the world am I to say I don't have time? And that was the moment, that was a light bulb moment for me. And here's the reality. Up until that point, people could have challenged me, encouraged me, pushed me, but until I was ready to take that next step and actually create some change, it just wasn't gonna happen. And so your ability to understand where people are they just thinking about the ability or the need to change? Or are they ready to actually take some steps? Or are they far into the process? And then match where they are, that's gonna help you be more effective at taking a coaching approach. So what are the stages of change? Let's just break them down a little bit. The first stage is, I'm not even ready to change at all. Maybe I'm not even aware of the problem, and so I'm just not ready to move at all. And then that leads to considering change. Well, okay, I have a challenge here or an opportunity. Maybe I might want to take that next step. And that leads to preparing to change. So what are the possible things that I could do? What steps could I take? How could I begin maybe to move forward? I'm just weighing the benefits and the costs. And then that leads to taking action. I'm actually ready to go. I'm actually ready to do something about this opportunity or this motivation that I have. And then that should lead to maintaining the change and sticking with that growth so that it becomes a habit and an ongoing part of life. And then sometimes it doesn't have to occur, but sometimes you can relapse and go backwards. And at that point, the right approach is to think, okay, what went well, maybe what didn't go well, and how can you redevelop some of those habits and get back towards that growth that you were shooting for. And so your ability as a people developer to think where is a person in the stages of change and then match that step is gonna help you move them along. Because the process of growth doesn't happen in one big step. It's one step at a time. And so it's unrealistic to expect a person who maybe is in the early stages of change to always instantly take action and make a real commitment to change. Sometimes in a development conversation and in a coaching conversation, it's appropriate just to even ask the question, are you at a point where you just want to talk about this and you're not necessarily ready to even do anything? You just need to process and you just need to think. That would be appropriate if someone is in the earlier stages of change. And then, if somebody's later in the process, your approach needs to be more thinking about the goals that they're gonna set and the next steps that they're gonna take. So here's a question for you. I wanna ask you to think about this for a minute. At what point in those stages of change does the light bulb moment occur? So just go ahead and look at that list. Where do you think it is? Is it between 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, or is it between 3 and 4? What do you guys think? Anybody think it's early on in the process is where the light bulb moment occurs? Anybody? A few of you guys? Okay. How many of you think it's probably gonna be in the middle of the process? Maybe at the point where I'm ready to take next steps. Anybody? Okay, most of you guys. Well, here's the reality. The answer is that the light bulb moment occurs in between each of those steps. Because it's a light bulb moment that causes you to actually want to take the next step. And so your ability to play the role of a coach is really focused on helping a person get to that light bulb moment at each step of the change and just continue to move them along in the stages of change. So the ability to understand where a person is in their growth and how they're moving through those stages of change will really help you engage people in their development much more effectively.
One of the things that I love about the whole coaching approach to developing others is it's so conversational. And it really is built around just having these great conversations with people and helping them grow the whole time. What I want to talk about now is I want to talk about how can we be purposeful in those conversations? How can we take those conversations that we have and just from being a random conversation to being a conversation that actually goes somewhere and has some purpose, all right? For me, I'm an introvert by nature and my personality is such that I'm naturally conflict avoidant. And so as a leader, early on, that became a problem because as a leader, you have to deal with conflict and have to deal with conflict effectively. And it was just a struggle for me. And I'd get in and I wouldn't have the right words to say. And I guess my introversion would kick in. And then I'd just be nervous. And I was always more nervous than the people that I was resolving the conflict with. And it was just a mess. And I thought, okay, I've got to fix this. If I'm going to be a quality leader, I've got to fix this issue. And so one of the things that helped me was I began to really think about what I wanted to say, think about what the issue was, and just I thought if I could get that conversation started in the right direction, then I think I had the skills to take it to where it needed to be. And so I would just practice, I'd rehearse, I would then get the initial thing and I would practice, and I would even write it down sometimes, and that just began to help me and I began to get more confident. I began to feel less nervous, and so having a guideline for the conversation began to really become a powerful thing. And so similarly with coaching conversations, we want them to be very purposeful. So we have this model that we're gonna talk about, and it's called the GROW model. And there's 4 different components to our conversation that I want to talk about. And the first thing in the conversation is the G-R-O-W, and that's the goal. Okay, what is the goal of the conversation? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're talking about the goal of the whole coaching relationship or the whole relation, just the goal of that conversation. Hey, you know what? We're sitting here talking and I just want this time to be valuable. What would you like to accomplish today? What would you like to accomplish before we end our conversation? And that's just what you want to do. Okay, what are we going to try to accomplish? Then the next thing we want to do is we want to establish the reality. R is reality. Okay, what really is going on? And as a coach, what I'd like to do in the reality thing is I just want to ask a bunch of questions and I want to help the person look at their problem from as many different angles as possible so that they get a real picture of what reality is. And this is where many of the breakthroughs happen, is helping people understand what really is going on, because that's the thing that we can be confusing as a coach. It's really powerful. All right, so once we've got the goal and once we've understand what really is going on, then we're going to take a look at options. Okay, what are options? What are the options that you want to do? And this is where you really want, as a coach, you really want to dig and you really want to continue to ask questions, because a lot of times it's not the first option that's the best option or even the second. Sometimes it's the third, fourth, or fifth. And so the more that we can talk about options, typically the better result that we will have. So as a coach, it's great to sit back, to dig, to ask questions, to help process, to help dig out those great options, and not to go ahead and as a coach, for me, I'll tell you, it's as difficult when you get to the option stage, it's difficult not to want to jump in and offer your own options. And so just be patient, ask questions, and dig out all the options that you can. So that's the third step. And then after we've got the goal, after we understand what reality is, we understand what our options are, now we're going to say, okay, what are we going to do? So that's when you get down to real concrete action steps. All right. Now, does every conversation follow this nice, neat little GROW? And it doesn't really work that way. And when you practice this in a little while, and when you see it even demonstrated, you're going to see that sometimes it's a little bit of, sometimes you have to go back, sometimes you have to re-clarify, and sometimes you might get down the stage and realize you might even have to even kind of start over a little bit. But as a framework, not a rigid structure, but as a framework for a conversation, this model can help our conversations become more purposeful, more intentional, and become more fruitful at the end of the day. All right, so now that we're going to get a chance to do is look at some demonstrations, and then you're going to get to practice going through some of the coaching conversations yourself. So let's go ahead and do that now.